research that's equally valuable.
My name is Franny Knight, and
I'm Damon Patterson.
Damon Patterson, and we are the co-host of the Kansas City Dev Report. And Damon, tell them what is the Kansas City Dev Report.
The Kansas City Dev Report is a weekly show every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Time, where we pretty much dig into different development projects that are happening in Kansas City. That's past, present, and future. So that's what it is. And every week we pick a new subject and we learn as much as we can about it, and then we share it with you.
That's great. I love that. That's a great intro. And I'll just add in that as a residential real estate agent, Urban Cool KC is my team that we sponsor this, and we're very interested on our team in knowing what affects the development and how it affects everybody who lives in Kansas City, who's looking to purchase homes or to just living in Kansas City. It's just fascinating to me. So I'm just happy to have Damon help me with this because he's a fabulous researcher on this. So this week's topic came about because I just couldn't stand it anymore of how all the new apartments that we have in Kansas City, especially downtown, Crossroads, not so much south of the plaza, but we just got a lot of new apartment buildings, high rises, and old buildings being redone as apartments. And so I asked Damon, man, we got to figure this out. What is going on? Is there really this need for apartments? And how does that affect just everything that's going on in Kansas City? And so Damon went to work and did some great research. And so the first question I have for you, Damon, that you found out that I thought was just really interesting is, how many new apartments are there?
If we're talking units, there's thousands of new apartments. Apartment buildings, there's hundreds. There's hundreds of them. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. They're popping up everywhere. And there's more planned. Like what we see being built with actual cranes and construction happen, those are the hundreds of buildings and the thousands of units, but there's more planned, like a lot more planned.
Yeah. In my notes that you gave me, there's around 2,700 new apartments. It just seems crazy. Listen, if you're watching right now on Facebook or YouTube, or you're watching later when we repost this, or if you're listening on our podcast, is this something you've noticed too in Kansas City? Have you been noticing all that? Just let us know. Is this something that's been on your radar? I just like to know what everybody else is thinking in Kansas City. Maybe I'll run a poll after this because I think it would be interesting to know what other people think. So, where are these apartments? That's my next question. You said they're. I said they're. I see them mostly downtown Crossroads.
Yeah. So they are concentrated kind of downtown and very close to downtown in proximity. But it does stretch to Midtown and some to the Plaza, almost to the Paseo, and then I think that's what is that Southwest Boulevard. Yeah, Southwest Boulevard. Is that what I'm thinking about? Yeah, but it is definitely concentrated downtown. I didn't even know we had that much room left downtown to put that many more apartments.
Yeah, all the well, and there's just so many too that the older buildings are being redeveloped as well.
Mhm.
So who are the key developers in this? Who's doing this?
Yeah, so that question right there is there's a lot of key players, but we do see some of the same entities or organizations kind of pop back up on different developments. A lot of them are investment firms, and yeah, investment firms is a large number. And then we have these different entities that I'm just now learning exist, some of them that are kind of branches of the city in some weird way. There's a lot of offices that are kind of city offices that are involved in the development. As far, I mean, I'm seeing like one, I didn't know anything about the Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority. That was new to me. City Planning Commission, Chambers of Commerce. You have neighborhood associations that are involved in these developments. City Council, the Missouri Department of Economic Development, the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, Economic Development Corporation, Kansas City Area Development Council, the Port Authority, and then you have firms like you have your, which we probably hear these names a lot, the Kopek and Brooks, Block, Remax, Reese Nichols, Cushman and Wakefield, Hunt Midwest, the Cordish companies. So that list there is what I'm seeing pop up over and over again. If we were to try and identify key players.
So, you know, I had learned about one of those entities, the Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority, LICRA for short, when I was putting together my urban realtor course on history of race and real estate in the country as well as Kansas City. And all across the country, there were many entities like the Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authorities that were put into place. This ours started in 1954 to help with blighted areas. And I find it interesting that
Yeah.
they are, part of this investment process, that they're in this mix, helping to make decisions about where apartments are
Go.
go. And
Yeah.
then and we'll talk about the TIFs, the tax credits and stuff that these investors get, that
Yeah.
LICRA and the city council and economic development, all those entities you just named off, the public entities that you named off, and how they're approving uh, for these investors to build these apartments because it's supposedly helping the blighted areas.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some misuse of the blighted designation when you look at some of the areas that are being defined as blighted, because that blighted designation gives access to money to so-called get rid of the blight or help the blight. But where some of these areas that have been defined as blight, I don't think they're blighted at all. So that's
Yeah, I mean, we forgot to give our little precursor that Damon and I are not developers. We do not have degrees in development.
No.
We, but we just love learning and talking about it. So if you are a developer and you're an urban planner or whatever, and you're like, well, this is why it makes sense to you. We sure does to somebody, but we're just kind of like normal people trying to look at this and see what's going on. So the next question is, it's kind of related to just what we were just talking about, which is, so how are they funded? How do these, I mean, we just talked about the lycra who has to
Yeah.
approve because it's in a blighted area, and so money comes in some. And so how's that go? How's that work?
Well, what I'm seeing as I was researching and trying to follow the money in a sense, it's construction, bank loans, investment firms, of course, um, and then of course is your property tax abatements, tax credits, tax breaks, um, assessments, and then once again the designation of blight, subsidies, TIFs, the creation of or designation of development zones. And what I'm learning is where they take an area and pretty much draw a box around it and it says this is a development zone. So within this zone, there's money available to develop new apartments and other things as well. Chapter 68 bonds, and they give exemptions on property taxes for 25 years, which is, I mean, that's a quarter of a century, and that's extremely attractive to developers to develop. I mean, 25 years we don't pay any taxes, and we're getting, you know, large sums of money to develop and to build. So I think the simple fact that these tax breaks and instruments are there, that's definitely attracting more development just because those instruments exist.
Right. Um, I I think everybody should go onto the Kansas City Parcel Viewer
Mhm.
and take a look at all the layers of what we just talked about. So here, I'm going to just I'll take you over there real quick just to show you um, what it looks like. If you haven't been to the Parcel Viewer, it's pretty interesting. Um, right, Damon? Don't you get?
Yeah,
I get lost in it.
yeah.
Okay,
It's
hold on a
it's
second. Here,
you can
let's
pretty
see.
much see what's going on in the city, who owns what's being developed, what areas are designated for different things. You can even see what projects are have been approved, which projects are pending to be approved. It's just a lot of different stuff that you can see with Parcel Viewer.
So what you do once you're on the Parcel Viewer, and just Google Parcel Viewer, and it'll bring up the Kansas City one. And if you come over here to the right to the layers, and here's where you can find out some of these development areas. So like if you want to know if it's a TIF zone, um, it's just everywhere. I just have to laugh. Um, or the PIEAs, where those zones are. The big one, the urban renewal, I think is um, where the lycra and some of these. So with urban renewal, I'm not sure if the Chapter 68 bonds where those are in this mix, but you can go and the thing is you can go and look at all the different development areas that uh, money is coming in, right? From federal money to local money to help build a lot of things, but one of them is to build these apartments. Now, so So we can kind of, so when there is tax abatements, the thing that is hard that comes to my mind is that then that takes away, so that takes away from the tax base
Right.
that partially goes to our schools, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how do we,
Schools, roads,
how do these,
infrastructure.
yeah, how do these public entities who are okaying it to be tax abated for these investors who end up making money, how how do they how does this get sorted out? Like, what did the city say when you ask them, so what about the school money? What if they're taking away the taxes? Where do
Mhm.
we get money for schools and potholes? How does that work?
Well, that is a that's a good question. And if you know, Kansas City has had some difficulties when it comes to what's happening with the school districts as far as funding, accreditation, which is I I find it really funny that some of these places, especially schools that were shut down, have somehow found the funding to turn into apartments and office space. These were schools that were shut down because of funding, but now there's funding available to turn them into office spaces in schools in our apartments. So that's kind of funny. But if in business, I guess if we're just looking at business and from that point of view, a building with 400 units and $1,200 a month rent makes more sense than a school. That building's making money now,
Right.
so I guess they can justify it that way. Which you know, some of these subjects are funny to
Yeah,
talk about.
listen, I know this is complicated, right?
Yeah,
Because as you were doing your research, you found that the flip side to why more apartments and then subsidizing investors with tax abatements, um, but it actually brings more people to the city, right? Um, that then increases the tax base.
yeah, yeah,
So I kind of get that, right? Like, that kind of makes
yeah.
sense.
So development. I mean, again, I'm not a developer, and a lot of this is just personal research and conversations we're having. But what I'm arriving to when we look at the why, it's from my perception, it's purely tax based, motivated. The city and the decision makers are looking at the tax base almost purely. Population growth and migration. Um, so the apartment developments go hand in hand with new businesses. It's almost like if said company opens its headquarters here, another developer says, "Well, I should put an apartment building here because we got new
Hmm.
jobs that are coming, so those people can live right there." And in some of the research, Kansas City's population is actually growing about 0.66% annually, and a lot of that's jobs, and it's projected to grow even more. And I know we had the conversation about the apartments downtown are, what was it, 80%
80%. Yeah.
people from out of town that are
Right.
occupying these places.
Right.
So
So
there's definitely
it is bringing people
a
in. Yeah.
migration.
Yeah. But I don't, I just read in the Kansas City, yeah, it was on a link today. The Kansas City Business Journal was talking about how Cerner, this is an interesting thing. So Cerner built the Innovations Campus over in Wyandotte County, over
Yeah.
by the Legends, and the unified government, uh, big tax big tax break for Cerner to do that, because they felt like it would bring more businesses, more people living there, and so it offsets what they were giving away in the tax breaks. But they announced today Cerner is closing, they're selling that. And they're not even done with their 25-year tax abatement.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so what happens now? And I forgot the who's over the unified Wyandotte government, but they're not very happy about this. This is really going to hurt the whole overall plan of what they were doing over there. And so, you know, it does go hand in hand. Jobs,
It's
company
funny. The
growth.
whole luring, especially luring in, you know, large companies with tax incentives. And, you know, it got to a point where the Kansas City government and the Kansas government were pretty much fighting over companies
Yeah,
to relocate. Like they were
yeah.
going in and say, hey, if you bring
The
your
border wars.
yeah, if you bring your company here, we'll give you this tax break. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, we'll give you this tax break. And they had to actually have some meetings and talk about not doing that to each other.
Yeah.
You know, and Kansas City has some advantages in the tech world because we do have fiber optic companies here that go hand in hand with tech. Like we're the proximity to major fiber optic backbones that connect. You know, they run us alongside the railroads and interstate networks. So that's part of the attraction for tech companies to come to Kansas City. We even got the nickname Silicon Prairie from Wall Street Journal.
Who are who are these people coming in to rent all these apartments? And it's, you know, as new businesses come up, um, uh, all of it going hand in hand. And,
Yeah.
and like I had read in the Business Journal about that 80% of all these new apartments not are not native Kansas Cityans.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Um, I do know, I will tell you that what I have seen happen since I've been a real estate agent is that I think, you know, it's mostly millennials that the research you did is it's you know, the 25 to 34,
Yep.
a lot of college graduates, recent graduates, so professionals.
Business
Um,
travelers, yeah,
right.
employees relocating, college students. Yep.
But
25, 34, and 35 to 44 too. And so there's a graph I found about, you know, what type of people are moving into that hub of apartments that's happening in Midtown and downtown. And the graph was pretty much showing it's mainly single people or small families, people who haven't started families yet that are moving into these, you know, $1,000 a month studios and up to 5,000 for a 3-bedroom, which they're saying is affordable housing.
okay.
Yeah, but yeah, that's definitely the age group.
So we've talked about the pros. Basically, it rejuvenates the downtown blighted area. I don't think it's that blighted anymore. It brings in more people, more jobs,
Jobs,
growth.
tax base grows. I think that's a large part is the tax base grows, and yeah, more jobs, more new stuff, new people, new places to shop and eat, and you know, modern office spaces and companies and whatnot. That's what it kind of broke down to me is.
So let's
Yeah,
talk about the cons.
yeah, that part. So I have way more cons than pros for this episode. Um, and what really jumped out at me was the neglect of K through 12 education, because that tax money is getting siphoned to new development and not schools. So you have facilities that are run down, and books and supplies, and just what makes a school a good school. A lot of that's not going to school, especially if we talk about public schools. I know we've got this weird charter school thing happening, but majority of people go to public schools in the city. I mean, hundreds of millions. We're talking hundreds of millions of new tax money that's going to these developments and not going to the schools. So that's a huge thing that popped up after I was researching it. I actually spent a lot of time with that part of it, as far as the schools being neglected. People want more infrastructure as far as streets and updated sewer lines, electric lines, which tax money is supposed to go to infrastructure, like potholes and things like that. We have a problem with potholes. I think there's some potholes that are like, they've been there for like 10 years in some areas. I know some potholes where I'm like, that's just been there forever. And so that's
Yeah.
a problem.
So just
gentrification is a problem. I know that word is a whole show by itself, but when you have these new developments that come into neighborhoods and people's who are on fixed income, or they've been used to paying a certain amount for their rent or their yearly taxes, those developments drive up the price, which inevitably makes those long-term residents that's been there have to move because they can't afford it anymore. So that's a problem.
right. Right. I'm going to give everybody a couple of resources. The book How to Kill a City talks about all of this. It's a really great book. I was part of a study group, book study group one time, reading that book, and it is the template for gentrification, and and supposedly the public entities that are working with these investors, and mostly it strips the services that we need more than it helps the services. I am going to bring in, I popped it in for a second, but this, so How to Kill a City is a great resource to read. But I also, Damon found this report, the goodjobsfirst.org, and they've done a study on how much cities have taken by these kinds of tax incentive developments, have taken away. How much have they? This is a research that they're showing how much is actually taken away from the schools by doing this. So it's astounding how
Yeah.
much. Not all cities are reporting in, is what I read, and it's a big report, and it's going to take a little
Yeah.
while to read it. But I so like 248 school districts in 22 states each lost more than 1 million in revenue,
Yeah.
and so it's not just you and I thinking, oh, well, it's taking money from schools. There's actually research on it that does that. And the How to Kill a City book, and the way I think about how we work together as communities and cities, as a country, as a world culture, and education is just critical for equalizing, having equal opportunities. But I will say that capitalism is always a, a fight against that,
Yeah.
because capitalism, you got to, people want to make money, and real estate development is a way to always make money. It's always going to be there, and so I don't know how we resolve.
Well, I think more transparency in the way that money moves in a city. Like, the average person doesn't. I don't think a lot of people even look at this stuff or even understand like a check stub. They don't understand what all those numbers mean. and where that money goes and who has access to that money. Um, the really ridiculous thing about the neglect of the education system is what makes a city great partially is how intelligent your citizens are.
Right. Yep.
The Port Authority in Kansas City was trying to make it cozy or attract a deal with Google, right? So Google in 2018, they've made somewhere around $137 billion, right? But the city was willing to give them tax exemptions from to build a $600 million data center. Like that company doesn't need a tax break. Some of these cities that are not as developed as other cities, I think they want so bad to be in that race that they're willing to give a lot of that tax money away. It's just like they're flirting with companies with tax breaks, you know. It's like, hey, we'll give you a tax break if you put your company here, you know. It's like they don't even need it. But yeah, as far as the other question, I think there needs to be more transparency and the average citizen understanding how the money works. I don't think people know.
Well, and we also have to always look at the white supremacy baked into the cake of it all too. I mean, that's I mean when you have uh, more people not educated and the wealthier being educating their own in private schools and just making more money, it continues to feed into white supremacy.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think it's a big part of it. The other book that I think is a great read is The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. It's a great book. Which brings into how when you keep one group of people down, it actually hurts everybody ultimately. Yeah. And her perfect example is the closing of the pools when pools had to be integrated in the 1950s. A lot of people who wanted them just to be white, they just closed them down so the kids didn't even get to go to the pool at all, and so it hurt everybody. And so I believe that's the case here. It's like if we are not educating everybody as well as we possibly can, it's going to hurt everybody. I mean, who's going to buy their stuff if you don't have anybody getting educated and getting good jobs to buy stuff? I mean, it's hard. I mean, keeping capitalism, versus social democracy, keeping a
balance.
Yes. And I just don't, that's what all those entities you read at the front of this podcast that are supposed to be our civic groups that are supposed to be protecting this get caught up in it too, right? They get caught up in the
money.
Money.
Business.
Yeah. It's really strange to me that happens, but it does. So, any other cons you want to throw out there?
Well, I think that's pretty much it. As far as people being neglected. That's when it's not good. And the designation of, if you have here in Kansas City, we know it's the east side. It's the east side of Kansas City that is overlooked. When this money comes from wherever it comes from, there's a lot of different places it comes from, but when it comes, it doesn't go to the east side usually, and that's not good, especially if you're taking the label blight. That's supposed to, if you say something's blight, it's supposed to mean that, the conditions aren't good or are close to not livable. And we know we have some areas like that on the east side, but those people are not getting the funding needed to make those situations better. So that word is being hijacked by developers.
Yes.
To put it frankly, it's being hijacked. So they can hijack the money.
Yeah, and not to start a whole new topic as we're wrapping up this topic, but the whole opportunity zones that came into existence a year ago, where people could put tax shelter, they could shelter their money into buying a building on the east side, because opportunity zones are in the blighted areas, which is mostly on the east side. And so you could buy a building and sit on it and not have to pay taxes, because people selling stuff on it's a tax shelter to help the wealthy. And so even when it looks like the opportunity zones are supposed to be developing and helping the east side, it's still, I mean, that's a whole, it's little tricks. How to Kill a City is, they tell you about all those little tricks. It's a template. This is a template. This is nothing new. This happens over and over and over again. But we need to talk about it, and we need to do what we can to.
It's happening in every city.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely happening in every city.
And they do have. We'll post on our Facebook page after this. Next week, we are going to talk about the tiny home development to help with the homeless people that's being proposed. I'm very excited about that. Damon has been doing the research on that, so we're going to talk about that. That's going to be a very interesting topic. I love that. So we're kind of going from big apartment developments to, and with all the money available for that, let's see if we have money available for housing for people like who really need it really bad. We'll see how that turns out, right? I'm hopeful. Hey, it could happen. There's some energy behind it. I was really surprised that there was money for hotel rooms for people. That has never happened in Kansas City. When they paid for homeless people's for hotel rooms. So there is some will behind it, but we got to get educated about it.
Yeah.
So okay, well, great. So listen, stay tuned. We'll be throwing up the new link for next week's show, and we'll let you know what it's going to be. And we appreciate everybody who popped in, popped out. If you're going to watch this when as a recorded video, we still would love to hear your comments. Any last words, Damon?
I'm
Damon. It's Franny, and this is the KC Dev Report.
Such a that's equally valuable.